So welcome to another preview video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we are taking an advanced look at Lords of Heaven from PHALANX. So this is a prototype copy, so there's going to be all sorts of different caveats. Most likely you're watching this on the crowdfunding, so that's kind of the context in which we're making this. This is a 2 to 4 player strategic war game that covers the Crusades. And you might ask, which Crusades? Very loosely, the Crusades.
Yeah.
It's not that kind of game.
You can refer to them as the first and the second Crusades, but that's really only in the
And there was also a third Crusade,
game.
but I don't know. I don't know.
All I'm saying is you play a certain amount of cards, that's the first Crusade, and then
Yep.
you play, that's the second in the game, not necessarily historical.
Yes. So this game is designed by, I want to get this correct. It's
Good luck.
Yes, Alexander Yagashinsky. That's what we're going to go
Sounds
with.
good.
And do not ask me to do that again, because
Yeah.
it will sound different.
You did well on the Alexander part.
Yes.
Because it definitely, yeah.
Well, I'm Alexander, so I've actually met a
yeah.
couple of Polish people who had that name, so I was like, oh yeah.
Got it.
So we had, so friend Russ and our brother-in-law Brum came over, and we did play this 4-player.
Yeah.
There is a kind of a 2 or 3 player option where you just have fewer factions and you flip the cards over, but I think we discussed this. You want to play this 4-player.
I think realistically, a lot of people are going to have to play it 2 or 3 player.
Yeah.
It's always hard to get 4 players together or 4 players that like this style of game. But you have a game like this to play 4 players. And particularly because 2 players are the Crusaders,
Yep.
and then 2 are the Caliphate and the
Caliphate and the Seljuks.
So they're working together loosely. It's one of those semi-cooperative style, you can help each other, you can get involved in different things, but ultimately in the end, you're trying to score the most points.
Yeah, there's only one winner,
Yeah.
and so you're bound
There
by
shall
these
be
kind
only one.
of loose alliances of whoever's kind of there,
Yeah.
which I like that aspect.
I did
for
too.
sure.
Although in our game it was interesting. I'm not sure it ever came up where I really had to make a meaningful decision about whether I would join a battle or not in a strategic sense. Does that make any sense?
Yes, no,
More
no,
often than
obviously.
not, you're going to want to join if you can because you're going to gain a victory point.
Yeah, you get a victory point just for kind of being in it.
Now you can lose your guys, but still it's worth it.
But if you support and that person wins, not only do you get the victory point for helping, you get an additional victory point. So the winner gets
Yeah.
3. If you ally with the winner, you get 2.
yep.
And then if both losers were in it, they get 1 apiece. So it's one of those games, especially with combat like that, where you can all help and kind of join in. And you think about it as like the prestige of, at least we were there, right? That you share these victory points, so you have to be careful about how and who and when you ask people to join in, because if I'm pretty sure I'm going to win this, I don't want to share my victory points with someone else. But if I very desperately need to, okay, who can I ask who's eligible, and then who do I ask? Because I don't want to give you a point. I can afford to give you a point more than I can afford to give them one.
Yeah.
And so you get into some of those neat things.
Well,
that's possible.
Yeah, and it's an interesting statement, your comment of if they can join in, because you have to be adjacent.
Yes.
You have to be able to somehow move your troop basically 1 space through a connecting line. And it's very hard to spread out. If you're spread out across the board, you're not able to really consolidate your power. You only have 10 of those influence markers.
Yeah,
and
their support.
I can't remember the other name of the other one. One has a crown, and then the other has the flag. So they represent your presence in a city and in a region. And you can't, if you have 1 or 2 spread out all over the board, you're not going to be controlling cities. You're not going to meaningfully be able to do real combat because
you won't be able to defend yourself.
Yeah, you roll a die and add in units based on how many of those flags you have in an area. So it's interesting you make that comment. It's like you have to, or can you assist? But really, you can't assist a lot. You're going to have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
And then I also think the choice comes down to really, am I going to ask for help? Do I truly need it, or do I feel confident in the battle card I've chosen, the number of units I've got? and then my skill at rolling a die that is
very punishing.
4 out of the 6 sides don't have any hits on them. But I like that element, and I like that cooperative kind of attitude. To me, it makes this game, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I think as we play it more and more, you would get a little more of that. But definitely an interesting aspect that can be explored.
And I think I like games, especially competitive ones, that have an element of that cooperation built into it. I think about something like Hegemony, which is very different in its style.
Yeah.
But you are trying to win and everyone else lose. But every action you take will help someone.
Yep.
And so here it's a bit more
also just helping you.
Yeah, but here it's like, okay, cool, I need the combat help, but I will also be giving you victory points to do that. And so my margin of victory over the pack will be lesser than it was, but it's at least something. So I really like that decision space in it. I thought that was a really neat part of it. But the other big part of this game that I really enjoyed was the card play. So you're going to play through 2 crusades, and a crusade is at most 8 rounds, so which is 8 card plays. So at most you're going to do 16 card plays in this game, and the reality is you will probably not do that many. And so if you think about, okay, I've got 16 things. Some of those actions you will be taking the effect, so you kind of get 2 and 1, but you are you're limited in what you can do, right?
Yeah.
This isn't one of those games where you can just do unlimited amount of stuffs and you've got plenty of time to kind of do it all. Yeah. We did the first crusade, and that second crusade went much quicker, and it was like, oh.
Yeah.
Like you don't have the time to like sit there in these like income and building cycles and things like that. It's like, oh no, like
I've got to get after it.
We got to do it, and
yeah,
because you can't bank on those last extra turns.
Particularly because in that second part of the game where it's going to end, and you're looking at the score, you realize, oh, this guy has a 3 or 4 point lead on me. I've got to get out and I've got to do something, right? I can't build up and feel secure about myself. You've got to kind of take some chances, and I did like that as well.
Well, and then that also feels like that goes into, in the first crusade, you're allowed to initiate 1 conflict.
Yep.
And in the second crusade, you're allowed to initiate 2 conflicts. So at most, in a 4-player game, you will have 4 conflicts, and then you'll have 8. And so it's really, really important who to fight, where to fight, and when to fight. Your choices for that make a massive difference, because there is a fixed amount of combats that can happen, which means there's a fixed amount of victory points up for grabs. And you can see maybe how a couple go, and someone won one where they were attacking and then they defended brilliantly. Well, all of a sudden they just got 6 points, and it's like, okay, well, everyone then like turns to try to dogpile that person, but you only have a limited number of combats to do that in, and that's a really neat facet of the game that I really like.
Well, and I also like, very similar to the other game that we played a couple of years ago from PHALANX, Brett Walda.
Yes.
Another similar style of game, like area control, a lot of combat. That game really incentivized combat, because some of the victory conditions you actually had to secure via combat.
Yeah, it is impossible to not do combat in that game.
Right, and I feel like here, I think you could go without combat, but you're only going to go without combat by hurting yourself.
I think you lose if you don't do combat.
You've got to get out, and you've got to win a combat to get those 3 points, a field battle, and then to win a siege, you get to put your crown in the highest spot,
which then gets you some victory points.
Right, 1.
Like, yeah.
But it's important that you do that, and I like that aspect. This is one of those games that you cannot turtle. You can't just sit in the corner and build. There is going to be conflict. Yes. There's going to be combat, and you've got to be a part of that.
And there will be field battles. The more we talk about this, the more I think it's so interesting. The value that you get from sieging a town
is
and
taking
control of it. If you do that in the first turn, you can score it once, and you can score it once at the end of the second turn. So you get 2 VPs from that. You get 1 from winning a siege. That's a total of 3 points. Or you get 3 points from winning a combat.
Yeah.
So do you just go and just fight field battle after field battle? But then that's really hard to fuel, right? Because you can only do 3 in a game. that
Well,
you start.
It's harder to get guys than you realize as well.
And if you don't have control of the cities, you don't have that income to
Yep.
buy the
Yep.
guys and to buy the stuff. So there is some balance there, but it's so interesting, the value of those. If you were just if you were to initiate 3 combats and to win all 3 of them, that's 9 victory points.
That's a lot. And the scores were 20 was the victor, and the low guy had 10.
And then that's saying nothing of you got attacked and you defended brilliantly, you'll get points for that.
Yep.
Supporting everyone else, and maybe you do control 1 or 2 places, so you picked up, 2 or 3 from
points.
that.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're in the mix.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating way to think about the game. There's a lot of nuance to that side of things, which I really enjoyed.
Well, and one thing I want to go back with the action part of the game, it's a card-driven game. There are faction-specific cards. There are cards that have the 2 factions that are aligned. Either side can use those. So when you have those cards and you play them and it's your faction, you get to take the event. Those events, if they are aligned only to you, seem to be fairly powerful.
Yes.
Meaning-
they might be more situational, but they're stronger.
You get a lot of resources, or you get a lot of control or units. If you use one that's aligned to both sides, it's still good for you, but it's not quite as good. That's a part you really need to understand. I like the drafting element.
Yeah.
To start the game, you end up drafting your first initial 4 cards, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We had some trouble with that rule, and that's one comment we would say. The rule book needs to be tightened up. It is a prototype, but I think it needs to have a little more explanation
Yes.
and specifics.
There was a lot of specific things that were omitted. There were some rules that we just had to house rule because they are not talked about at all.
Right.
Which, it's a prototype, so you kind of expect that, and we kind of do. But when it's rules that are like super key about
Yeah.
like refilling your hands with cards and like what happens in a tie in combat.
Yeah, that wasn't really,
Just
that
like-
wasn't clear at all.
And
Didn't say anything.
Not talked about, just not
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mentioned.
The other one I think that was key was when you have your 10 discs, your control
Yes.
and influence, when you put them out and then you want to take an influence action, can you take one from another part of the board and move it somewhere? We kind of adjudicated that,
Yeah,
and we said you could,
it
but
came
I
up
can see.
twice.
Yeah, but I can see why you shouldn't. It's part of the game. It's hard to travel from
Sure.
this point to.
But it's a sacrifice as well.
It is. You're losing control there.
But again, we're having this discussion because it's just not mentioned.
Yeah, it's not clear.
So
Yeah, but that's one of our, I think, points that needs to be worked on. But the concept of the cards, playing your cards well to gain the maximum benefit you can, because you only have 12 to 16
yeah, you don't have a lot.
turns, you've got to take advantage of all the different parts, right? Using the events, getting the benefits on the side banners of the cards, which always ends up being things like extra units or extra gold. You've got to play those well and use them well, or you're not going to make much progress, I found. And I thought the first turn or two, it was slow going and I wasn't getting as good. But then later on, I'm like, okay, I got to do this card here because look what I'm going to get, And
Yeah.
But maximizing those efforts is really good. That's also a very Euro style mechanic.
But that's one of those mechanics I really like.
I agree.
It's almost like, because there's 5 cards down here. You're going to play one, discard the bottom one, and it's like this little tableau. You're going to pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gold, right?
And a guy.
The guy is covered up.
Oh, sorry.
But like that's, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do my income because this
Yep.
is the income action. So I'm going to get a whole bunch of other stuff. But I got all this gold, so I don't need gold for my income. So I might pick up units. I might pick up faith,
Yep.
right? Or same thing for movement. Cool, I'm going to move some guys, but I'm going to get paid before I do so.
Yeah.
But I like the flip side of that with the develop action and the influence action, where instead of using that top banner, which is a reward, you use the bottom one, which is the cost. It's a penalty.
Yep.
And so you can play a card down, and you make it really expensive for the next few people to go there,
Yeah.
who might have to spend 4 just to
Yeah,
get into it.
You have to add up all the red coins, and some of those had 2 coins on
Yes.
them. And if you have 2 of those, that makes, how many actions did I take at the end of the game where I had to pay 4 coins to
I
get.
had to do it a number of times.
But I had to do it because that's what I needed to do to get my VP.
You pay 4 for the privilege of paying 3 to
To
influence
put guys
an area.
out.
And it's like,
It's interesting, but mastering this part of the game is very
really
important.
fun part of it. And like you said, it's very Euro.
It
That's
is.
one of those Euro things that I actually really like.
Yeah, I think I wanted to say that the game is about efficiency of actions.
Very much so.
You cannot take an action where you don't get multiple benefits from it. If you do, and you do that turn and turn after,
you just get behind.
You're gonna lose. So that's a big part of the game. Managing your hands properly is a big part of the game. Understanding when and where you can and should do combat. And then I thought one of the best parts was the way that combat worked. Right? It's kind of a hidden mechanic.
Yeah.
You know generally that, Alexander's got 8 guys.
Yeah, because the units are out front of the little screen. So you know the units.
Or you've got a bunch of knights hanging out there. So I don't want to attack you there, but you know what people have, but then you take that all into your hand, and the hidden behind the screen is your what's called faith. And that can act as gold to buy things or as a bonus in combat, an extra strength. You don't know how many of those people have. There were times where I was earning 4 to 6 a turn because I had built all of my mosques. But you put all those in your hand, your sweaty hand, and then you put a card down that you're going to play, and it can be a bluff. You can say, I'm not playing a card, but you want everybody to think you're going hog wild, and then everybody drops their stuff, you add it up, but that's not it. You then get to roll dice.
Yeah.
And these dice, 2 of the 6 sides have hits. One of them has a double sword, and one has 1 sword with a blood drop.
And so those contribute to your score, which is what will win you the battle.
Yep. But then you're trying to also do maximum wounds to your enemies so that they lose all of their guys. And then you want to, frankly, minimize those to you. I just thought that the hidden elements, the combat cards, the keeping the faith behind the board, and then how many times did you re-roll hoping to get a hit?
Oh, and it's you can't buy hits.
It's just hard.
You can buy wounds, but you can't buy hits.
But I love the way this combat works together. I think it's very well done.
It's interesting because I was a little bit nervous at first when we were reading the combat rules because I'm like, we have card play, we have hidden shit, and we have dice play. This feels like it's kind of a lot and could be a bit messy, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, it works out pretty easily.
Here's what I'm committing. You can commit a certain limit based on how much support you have in the area. And so that's like that bluffing and maths game going on. Cool.
Yeah.
You have a ton of guys, but you only have 2 support. So at most you can commit 4 of them.
Yeah.
I can kind of guess, okay, you had a couple horses or you got siege engines, and depending on what type of combat, you can't use either one of those. So you can kind of like, okay, I can get a ballpark of I need to commit this, and then throw in some faith for good measure, play a really good combat card, and hope for some good dice.
Yeah.
So you can figure out some of it, but not all of it. And so I like a combat where it's random, but not too random.
Well, it felt like it was, I could plan and try to do well, but it ultimately came down to, did I roll 1 or 2 hits that I needed? I didn't, I lost.
Yes.
Or conversely, you needed to roll a couple of doubles, and you did roll doubles, and so I lost the combat.
Or the poor guy who didn't build any churches or mosques can't do rerolls, and so you get what you get, and that's tough.
So I thought the combat was very well done. I thought it worked very well with the game. I always like a game that has combat cards. I just enjoy them. But you can only use those combat cards when they're affiliated with your faction or the double faction.
To get the effect of it.
You
always get the sword.
You always get the sword to the right, but then there's that cool...
I think I only ever used one of those cool things, and it was to get an extra wound.
I used the one where I could spend up to 6 gold to gain 1 strength for each 2 gold. So I got 3 total.
I had a really cool one, but it was if you have influence in the city, you get +2 in the field battle.
Oh, nice.
But it was affiliated with someone else. I was like, I can't use it. Even though I had the stuff for it, I was like, that sucked. But yeah, that part of it was fun and enjoyable. But and whilst it's a bit of a sideshow, right? Oh, we're going to do a combat, cool. Let's get the stuff and do this, that, and this. Again, there's a fixed and a limited amount of combat in the game.
Yeah.
So it's not like everyone's doing 5 combats in a turn and it takes absolutely forever.
Yeah.
So that was also kind of like a welcome thing where it just kept the pace of the game going.
Yeah. I did think the game was long for what it is, but part of that first play, first understanding, new group. I think
And we had to fight with this a little
right,
bit.
a little
and there was a
bit.
lot
I
of
think
discussions going on.
if the rules were cleaned up and they maybe had the other comment I would have, these screens are great, but they're really tiny.
Yes.
And I get it, you don't want a huge screen, but it'd be nice to have a player aid that would help me understand.
And the back of the box says 60 plus minutes,
Yeah,
which is utterly meaningless.
This is a 2 to 2.5 hour game, I think.
Yeah, and I think when you get experienced with it, you'll be able to do it quicker for sure.
Yeah.
Like if we played this again right now, it would be much quicker. But
Yeah.
again, if you had all the rules adjudicated as they needed to be and as clear as they needed
It
to
would
be,
play quicker.
This is a 12-page rule book.
Yeah.
And like the pictorial setup was generally speaking really good. There was only one thing that was a bit of a goof. And like they got these core concepts, and then you get to gameplay. The gameplay is like 4, 5, 6 pages. Like there's really not a ton of rules to it. It's just that some of the key rules are either not mentioned at all or are vague where they needn't be.
Sometimes it would just have required one extra word, right?
Yeah. Or just a clause saying, by the way, you cannot do this.
Yeah, right. Yes, and some games do that, right? Where they say it cannot be used to do X.
And
I
they
think
have some of that in here. They're like, by the way, you can't do this. And you're like, thanks for clarifying that.
But just put it on the card.
But yeah,
art-wise and production-wise, I mean, the art's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
the
nice
board
looking.
The board looks great. The box is great. We thought the board was a little big for what it was, or even make it bigger and just cut out the Mediterranean.
There's like a lot of negative space with the Mediterranean, with the Nile Delta, and so like it could have been put smaller, or you blow the stuff up.
Right.
And then the connecting lines between everything was a bit of a nightmare to see. That needs to be emboldened.
Or you've got white
in
on yellowy brown.
But it's
tan.
like the smallest white dots.
They need to be a little thicker. But it's a beautiful production, and I think Phalanx always has good art, good production, good components.
And I'd like to see in the final game, I don't know what their plans are, if these could be like wooden discs or something, or like, I don't know, something a bit more.
The units
because these are very, very small counters.
Yeah.
And especially the ones that you're like mashing in your hands and like holding, if those could be a more substantial component than cardboarding, just gonna have a bit more lasting staying power.
Yep. But it's a prototype.
We have no idea what they'll actually look like, but it's Phalanx. They usually bump up the components to be really high quality, so I do have high hopes for that. But yeah, I had a really good time playing this.
Well, I did too. I would love to play it again. I think everybody enjoyed. I think we said it a couple of times. I really enjoy what we are doing, how we're doing actions. Understanding what you're doing is a different story, and that just takes a couple of plays. But
you'll play it that one time, you'll understand so much more. And then I think what I liked about this game is that it wasn't really what you're not doing so much in this massive, big, overwrought game. The game's really...
it's pretty tight.
It's got like 8 spaces.
9 spaces.
9 spaces.
Yep. Which 2 of them aren't involved in the first part of the game.
So
they get added later.
You're going to take, 6 to 8 actions, a lot of them doubled. So let's say you're doing 12 or 13 things in that first crusade across 7 spaces. That's not a ton.
Nope.
So it's this big, nice box, and it's great, but really, like, it's not some grand, massive, complex game. Like, it feels like this kind of small, intimate little game where you're just doing little bits and pieces here, and you get into one fight in that first round. It's just quite unique. I've not really experienced anything quite like that in a war game like this. So I really enjoyed that.
I do think that's a scale and a historical thing. You can't move across the deserts and do battle after battle after battle. You've got to move from oasis to oasis or sanctuary to sanctuary, and that takes time. This was not airlifting troops, right?
Yeah.
It was marching across hundreds, if not 1,000 miles worth of desert to get to where you're going. But
yeah, sometimes you're just like, I play a card and pay some money to like bump up one space in a city and to put a support flag out.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's all you do.
Yeah.
And it's the accumulation of all of that over the course of the 2 Crusades is what's enjoyable, but it's so many other games that you can get overwhelmed with all the variety and the different bits and pieces that goes on.
Yeah.
Sometimes we were playing it and I was like, yeah, this is a very manageable 12-page rule book. And
well, and you only have 4 actions that you can really choose from, right? You don't have 10.
But I think another company would do that. It would be a 30-page rule book with 10 actions, and it would be like way more complicated than it needed to be.
Yeah.
I think this sits at a really, really interesting complexity and scale space. That's
Very
for sure.
approachable.
So yes, Lords of Heaven from Phalanx. You should back this if you're interested. And I look forward to the final production because Phalanx always does knock it out of the park with that. And that was really the only thing lacking. Some rules rewrite, get yourself some nice components that you can have a very enjoyable and eminently playable Crusades game. Because we don't play many Crusades games, and that's because they're often very complex and very involved.
We have several of them that we've tried a couple of times, and these are pretty heavy war games, but they're not easy to grok.
But I think that's what I really like about this.
It's easy to grok.
When you're like, oh, this one, it's got the interesting theme, but it is much more playable than something like what about Onward Christian Soldiers, where you need like.
Well, I have Kingdom of Heaven and
like
a great game, but I'm telling you what, that's a hard.
Those are much more involved and heavy. This plays at a much lighter level, and you can play this with people who aren't real war gamers. That's the reality of it, because it's you will do some conflict, but it doesn't have to be a ton of it.
No.
So, Lords of Heaven from Phalanx, check this out if you're interested, but appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from playersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.